Welcome to the debate. I want to start today with a piece of recent scientific news that, honestly, it keeps me up at night, even as someone who is a proponent of this technology. Neuroscientists have now developed a non-invasive decoder. It can reconstruct continuous language from cortical semantic representations using fMRI.
Which is a mouthful.
It is a massive mouthful, so let me just put it in plain English. Technology can now read imagined speech, silent thoughts. We have, for all intents and purposes, breached the final wall of privacy, the human mind itself.
And it is a terrifying realization, because it forces us to confront the fact that this breach is not just happening in some high-tech lab. It's happening in our living rooms, in our bedrooms. The wall of the mind might be the final frontier, but, the walls of our homes have been transparent for a long, long time.
And that's the perfect pivot point for today. We're discussing the architecture of that very transparency. Ambient intelligence, or MI.
A very sanitized term for what is essentially a surveillance grid.
Well, it's a term that was coined back in the late 90s by Palo Alto Ventures in Philips. And for anyone listening who hears ambient intelligence and just thinks of, ambient music, let's be precise. MI refers to physical environments that are embedded with electronic systems. Systems that are sensitive, adaptive, and responsive to human presence. It's the smart home, the smart city, but specifically the part that acts proactively. It's not just waiting for you to press a button.
Argue that AMI is a tool for radical care, that it offers efficiency, safety, and importantly, democratization, especially when we look at places like healthcare in the developing world. We're finally using data to save lives, not just to sell ads.
And I am here to argue that we're fundamentally mistaking control for care. Drawing heavily on the philosopher Byung-Chul Han, I believe AMI is the infrastructure for a society of self-exploitation. We are creating a world where these smart environments actually strip us of our autonomy and leave us isolated.
Okay, I want to challenge that phrase, strip us of our autonomy, right out of the gate. And I want to do it with some hard data. My argument for ambient intelligence is really rooted in this concept of digital phenotyping. It's a concept that is revolutionizing medicine. We're moving from a model where we treat sickness after it happens, a reactive model, to one where we can actually prevent it.
Digital phenotyping. It does sound a bit like a euphemism for constant behavioral tracking.
It's the medicalization of behavior, and it saves lives. Look, there was this fascinating study in JMIR nursing. It looked at older adults during two incredibly high stress events, the COVID-19 pandemic and major wildfire smoke events. Now, usually to know how an elderly patient is doing, you have to drag them into a clinic or rely on them telling you, often inaccurately, how they feel.
A process which, I'd argue, preserves their dignity and privacy.
A process which often results in them dying alone because they didn't want to be a burden. In this study, smart home sensors tracked their behavior non-invasively, and the data was just incredible. During the pandemic, the homes detected a 3.8-hour decrease in time spent out of the house. Okay, that's interesting, but this is the critical part. The sensors picked up a 946% increase in restless sleep.
Wait, 946%?
Yes, nearly 10 times the normal amount of agitation. And during the wildfire events, restless sleep went down, but their indoor activity plummeted by over 114%. So here's the takeaway for the audience. The house knew the patient was deteriorating before the patient did. This lets caregivers intervene upstream. We can act before the fall happens, before the stroke. That isn't a prison, that's a safety net.
The utility in a medical vacuum. I mean, if you frame it strictly as saving grandma, of course it sounds benevolent. But we have to look at the Maxwell effect.
The physics concept? You're going to have to explain that.
In a way, yes. So the Maxwell effect, or the observer effect, basically suggests that the moment you monitor a system to measure it, you inevitably change the nature of that system. And when you apply this to human beings, it can be catastrophic. You call it proactive care, but the philosopher Byung-Chul Han would call it the shift from a disciplinary society to an achievement society.
Okay, you'll need to break that down. How does a motion sensor in a hallway create an achievement society?
Well, think about the 20th century. Foucault called that a disciplinary society. You were controlled by external forces, prisons, factories, hospitals. The whole operating mode was negativity. You are not allowed to do this. You must do that.
Right.
But we've moved into something more insidious. In an achievement society, which is facilitated by ambient intelligence, the operating verb is can. You can optimize your sleep score. You can lower your heart rate. You can be more productive. We aren't oppressed by a warden anymore. We oppress ourselves. We become what Hahn calls the animal laborans, the laboring animal that exploits itself voluntarily, constantly, to generate better data for the system. The digital prison isn't guarded by some guy with a stick. It's guarded by our own obsession with our metrics.
That is a very high-minded way of saying people like to be healthy, but it feels incredibly abstract. Let's try and ground this in economic reality, because for billions of people, this isn't about ontological self-exploitation, it's about survival.
And survival is precisely what's at risk when you trade true freedom for a feeling of safety.
Let's talk about Kenya. The explosion of smart home tech in the global south is a story that gets completely ignored in these philosophical debates. In Kenya, the market for this tech is projected to reach 68.4% household penetration by 2029.
But high adoption rates just prove the marketing is effective, not that the technology is inherently good for people.
No, it proves it solves a real friction point. In Nairobi, this is not a toy for the ultra-rich. Entry-level systems start at around 75,000 Kenyan shillings. That is accessible to the middle class. And we are not talking about Alexa playing a song. We're talking about energy efficiency that saves families up to 30% on their bills. And more importantly, we are talking about physical security.
Security is always the Trojan horse.
Always. In a city where property crime is a genuine daily concern, remote gate access through geofencing or biometric locks, that's not a Trojan horse. It is peace of mind. It allows a homeowner to let in emergency services remotely or just make sure their family is safe without having to get out of the car in a vulnerable situation. Real estate data even shows that properties with these systems command a 10% premium. The market is screaming that this value is real.
Fingerprints. This is the literal digitization of the human body. When you install that lock, you're not just securing a door. You are trading the sanctity of your private sphere for a feeling of safety that is actually a massive data leak waiting to happen.
A leak to whom? It's a closed-loop system in most of these cases.
It is never a closed loop. I mean, think about the historical context for a second. In East Germany, the Stasi, the secret police, they had to employ one human informant for every 3 citizens to achieve total surveillance. It was labor-intensive, it was inefficient. Today, through AMI, we achieve a surveillance density that the Stasi could only dream of, and we do it automatically. We don't need a man on the corner. We have the doorbell camera.
Comparing a family in Nairobi installing a smart lock to the Stasi seems, well, it seems sensationalist. One is state oppression to crush dissent. The other is a consumer tool to keep out burglars.
But the infrastructure is the same. The tool itself is the vulnerability. You say it keeps people safe. What about the Ring camera hacks? We had bad actors gaining access to cameras inside people's homes in children's bedrooms and harassing them through the speakers. Vizio was fined $2.2 million for scraping viewing data without consent. We're becoming, as the source material puts it, consumer cattle. We are being herded by psychographic data, not by physical fences.
Look, security vulnerabilities are engineering problems. They're bugs, not features. We can improve encryption, we can legislate data minimization, but you cannot patch the human need for efficiency and for health. Let's pivot to the workplace, because I think the promise of AI is arguably strongest there, despite what you say about self-exploitation.
The workplace is where the achievement society is at its most brutal.
I'm not so sure. If you look at the Guardian's future scenarios for 2035, you see this transformation where drudgery is finally automated. Imagine an AI doctor. It listens in the background of a consultation, ambiently. It cross-references what the patient is saying against thousands of medical journals in real time.
Right. Reducing the patient to a walking data set.
No, freeing the doctor. A GP today spends half the consultation just typing notes. If AI handles the data entry and the diagnostic cross-referencing, the human doctor is freed up to actually connect with the patient. Empathy becomes the primary job again.
That's the pitch. That's always the pitch. But the reality is different.
The reality could finally be the Keynesian prediction. Keynes predicted a 15-hour work week because he thought technology would solve production. He was wrong because we just kept inventing new needs.
But AI, it solves the friction of maintenance. If the fridge stocks itself via drone, if your calendar manages itself, humans are finally liberated for creative leisure.
That is a utopian fantasy. It completely ignores the psychological reality of techno-stress. I mean, look at the right to disconnect legislation that's popping up all over the EU and the Western Balkans. Why do those laws even need to exist? Because the 15-hour workweek isn't happening? Instead, techno-invasion means we carry the office in our pocket, in our car, and now, with AMI, in our kitchen.
But again, that sounds like a failure of corporate policy, not a failure of the sensor on the wall.
It's structural. Byung-Chul Han describes this so tragically as the pornographication of the ego.
That is a loaded phrase. I assume he's not talking about actual pornography.
No. He means we've become obsessed with displaying ourselves, with tracking ourselves, with exposing our inner lives to the data grid. When your environment constantly responds to you and anticipates you and reflects your data back to you, you lose what he calls the other.
Define the other in this context.
The other is the unknown. It's friction. It's the part of the world that doesn't care about you, that doesn't know your Netflix preferences. True freedom, true creativity, even true love, they require an encounter with something that resists you, that pushes back. AMI smooths out the world until there's nothing left but a mirror. We're not liberated for leisure. We are trapped in a digital cave where we only ever interact with optimized versions of ourselves.
I think you're romanticizing friction. There is nothing romantic about an elderly person falling down the stairs or a working mother burning out because she has to manage a household manually on top of her job. But let's take that digital cave metaphor and apply it to democracy, because I believe AMI doesn't create a cave, it turns on the lights.
Light can be blinding.
Data brings transparency. In the Kenyan context we discussed, these smart systems provide audit trails. In medicine, sensors provide objective data, not a patient's faulty memory. Democracy relies on shared facts. AMI generates objective facts about how we live.
But an overload of data destroys the capacity for truth. Hans calls this an infocracy.
An infocracy. Help us with that one.
It's the death of discourse. Democracy requires what he calls temporal stability. It needs time. Time to think, to debate, to form a rational argument. fMRI and the digital world create a rhizomatic structure of information.
Rhizomatic, like a root system?
Exactly. Think of a tree versus grass. A tree has a trunk, a center. A rhizome, like ginger or grass, shoots out in all directions with no center, no beginning, no end. Information today is rhizomatic. It's fragmented, viral, ephemeral.
That sounds like democratization to me. No more gatekeepers.
It's chaos. Everyone has access to noise, not truth. Truth is being replaced by data points. And when everything is just data, nothing is true. And this brings us right back to your opening hook, the fMRI, the mind reading.
Right.
If that wall around our brain is breached, if our very thoughts become data points for the environment to harvest, we have destroyed the last refuge of the individual. You cannot have a democracy without private individuals who can think freely, away from the gaze of the system. If the system knows what I'm going to say before I say it, I am no longer a citizen. I'm just a variable.
I see the risk. I really do. But I also see the inevitability. I mean, the train has left the station. The market growth in places like Kenya, again, we're looking at nearly 70% penetration in a few years. That proves that people want this. They're voting with their wallets.
Just because people walk voluntarily into a prison doesn't mean it isn't a prison.
But it does mean we need to focus on how we build it. We need ethical smart home tech. We need network encryption, data minimization, so the house knows you fell, but it doesn't send a video of it to a cloud server in another country. We need local control.
Ethical surveillance feels like a contradiction in terms.
It's a necessity to throw out the baby with the bathwater, to deny the very real benefits of keeping the elderly safe or securing a home because of a philosophical fear is a mistake. The benefits are worth the risks, if and only if we manage them correctly.
I just fear we are sleepwalking. The source material notes that the years 2025 to 2030 will decide which side we fall on.
And we are trading the agony of eros, the difficulty and richness of real human connection, for a sterile, optimized environment where we are both the prisoner and the guard.
And I suppose that is the choice we face. A world that anticipates our needs and keeps us safe versus a world that knows us too well and, perhaps, controls us too deeply.
A choice between the smart home and the glass cell.
Thank you for listening to the debate. We invite you to look at your own environment today, your watch, your phone, and ask, is it serving you or are you serving it?
Until next time.